Time to get the text in here. I'm going to copy and paste the text. You can create your text in Photoshop and import it as a layer. I'm just going to do a usual copy, selecting copy. Going within After Effects, picking up the text tool, clicking out here, and then pasting. This can be masked out, so only a mask area would show the text, and then as it scrolls on by, we can read line by line, much like singing karaoke. You're trying to lead someone through this experience of the text and using some slight keyframing, maybe some opacity, maybe a little bit of movement to support what the reader is seeing out on screen. We have to lead the viewer through this experience. We have to make sure it's readable, make sure that the line stays on screen long enough for you or someone else to read it and absorb it before it disappears. It doesn't mean that you can't lead them from an upper place to the middle of the screen, somewhere up again. Just be aware of where you're leading someone's eyes as you animate the text. This is the whole group of text, and you could turn it on and turn it off as needed. I'm going to duplicate this layer by selecting the layer, hitting Command D or Control D, hiding my original one, and I can just call this one Original. I'll keep on duplicating this original one and deleting lines as needed. So this first one, I'm just going to delete all the other lines. Hope is the thing with feathers. If I want to emphasize the word hope, maybe I'll have that up on screen first and then fade in the rest of the type. Not using mask in this video. Otherwise, I could just have the word hope exposed and then using a mask, grow that mask out to reveal the rest of the sentence. I'm going to rename this line 1. So in the layer, I'll just call it line 1. I'm going to duplicate line 1 because I want that word hope to be in the center. And I'll just reorder the layers by clicking and drag them around. So I'm putting line 1 up here. I'll turn off line 2. I'm going to delete everything else. I'll take care of line 2 right now, which means I have to delete the word hope. I'll toggle back on line 1. If I want this to be exactly in the center, off on the right side, I could scroll on down to alignment. If you don't see alignment, window align. There's alignment. With alignment, I could do align horizontally and align vertically. And it seems to be in the center. If I'm wrong about that, let me just drag that up. Right there and there. And then you'll question, is this where you want to start? Maybe hope should be floating on up. Or maybe hope grows towards us. So now to do some experiments. If this will be my end position of hope, and assuming that I'm not going to change my type font size around, let me go to frame, let's say 30. And this is my end position. So I'll key position, scale, and opacity. I'm thinking that I'm not going to be rotating type. I might change my mind a little bit. I went to frame 30 because I want this to be the end position where the word hope is on there. I'll go back to frame 0 and let me first play with opacity. Because all the stopwatches are turned on, that means it's ready to animate. I'll just drag down the opacity to 0. I'll move to, let's say, frame 100. I'll press the N key to shorten my workspace so I could keep on reviewing this line. And I'll press the space bar, hope. Hope coming in like this. What if I go back to frame 0 and I made the scale smaller and played it? Hope. So that could be interesting. I think it's a little too much movement, and as a side note, it's scaling around the pivot point. I don't want to scale around the pivot point off to the left side. Let me get my anchor tool and let me re-anchor this into the center. Snapping's on. Let me delete my position key for a moment and reestablish it because I moved the pivot point. I have to do that. Hope. That feels nice. Though I still think I prefer it just coming in without any scaling. So I'm just going to leave it up there. That means I need to get rid of this scale key. And if I'm not going to be using scale keys throughout this, I'm just going to turn off scaling. Hope. Next, I need the next line. And my next line is this line. Let me center the pivot. I'll center this line by going under a line here and here. If I turn on line 1, we can see they're overlapping, which could be okay, because maybe when this line appears, it pushes the other one out, or hope moves up to accept this new line fading in. This might be the story I want to tell. Let's see it, and I'll go from there. So right now, let me turn off line 2 for a moment. Hope, I can read hope. So roughly as hope fades in, I'm thinking it takes maybe 10 frames extra because I'm still reading it, hope. I'm reading it out loud, so this way I get the timing correct. Hope. So roughly by, let's say, frame 40 is when the next line should come on in because I already absorbed the word hope. So let's say by frame 40. This is line 2. Line 2 exists from frame 0 onward to frame 900. I want to shorten this line. I can do this by dragging this over here. When I say shorten, I mean remove the existence of this asset in the layer. So before here, it doesn't exist, and then it pops into existence. One way I could do this is, as I showed, I'm at frame 40. Maybe I'll just make sure I'm working on something closer to the 15, so I'll give it a half a second show up. I could just drag this layer, and by dragging this layer, I'm not moving this layer. There's a difference between dragging an end of layer, which shortens the existence of the content within that layered track, and clicking somewhere in the middle layer and just moving it over. If you look when you click and drag, you can see that these 4 vertical lines show up, and that's the clue that you're dragging or moving the whole layer, as opposed to when you're at an end of a layer, these double arrows show up that allow you to shorten its existence. And I'll undo that. To clip this layer without splitting it is to go to a particular frame, such as frame 45, press the Alt or Option key, and press the left bracket to trim to that point. So this trims this layer without moving it. If I want to trim it the other way, let me hit undo. Press the Alt and the right bracket to trim it away on this side. All right, Option there. All right, so by the time frame 45 rolls around, the word hope has to be high enough, otherwise it'll be bumped by the line. I'm going to expose my transformations for line 1. I'll go back to roughly around here. Let's see my position. I don't need any keys for the anchor point. So from frame 30 to to roughly frame 40. Hope is right there. Now I'll move it upward, and I'll hold down the Shift and arrow key to move it up 10, 20, 30 pixels. And I guess I have to do a little more, so I'll click on here to go back to my previous keyframe. I'll move it up a little more. And okay, getting somewhere, but it feels a little bit forced. So maybe instead of waiting when it establishes, maybe hope is always on the move, rising up. I'll take this first position key and I'll just drag it back to frame 0, and then I'll have this happening. And now I'll deal with the next line. The next line should maybe fade in, since that seems to be the theme I'm going with right now. I'll expose line 2 under transformations and under opacity. I'll set my opacity down to 0 for this frame. I'll move over time to frame 60, and I can either type in 60 here, so I'm going to hold down the Control Shift key. This will move the playback head over 10 units. Control Shift, right arrow, 55, and now I just have to go another 5 frames. So I'll release the Shift and just press Control, right arrow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll set the opacity for this line to 100%. I'll go back to the original one and set that key down to 0%. And I'll take a look at this. I'm going to make sure hope rises a little bit higher so it doesn't bump into the letter I. So I'll go back to this initial keyframe. The best way to go back to the initial position keyframe is to use the arrowheads. I'll go up maybe another 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll go back to my animation. I'll take another look at it. And it's okay. I think if the fade on of this was happening as that rose, it will look a little more connected. And the way I could do that is either by moving these keys back and retrimming it, or just dragging this whole layer back a little bit. By the time hope establishes itself, the second line fades on. Now that a general look is applied to this, which seems to be fade on and slowly move things, try to repeat that pattern unless, of course, you feel the need to surprise. The last thing, creating the visual, is how to get these words to disappear. Just don't go too wild about the change up, because it has to be a consistent visual art piece, and too much change up will not make it flow as part of the same piece of art. So use change up sparingly, but do use them.